Good morning. It is July 20th, our July 20th version of Bar Talk. And we have a special guest on for today. And bear with me one second. So we have a special guest on for today to talk to us about how we're going to spur the economy on in the state of Maine. But also, I wanted to mention that before we get started, just in case we don't have a chance to talk about this again, we did reach out to the judicial branch to ask them about answers to questions that we posed last Monday. And I'm also throwing out there that I've begun to receive email requests to not object to lengthening the time period for grand juries to review felony charges. So I am curious from our membership what their thoughts are and the position we should take with that. So with no further ado, I want to move to our guest speaker, Laurie Lachance. She's a native from Dover Foxcroft, Maine. She is Thomas College's 5th president and the first female and alumna to lead the college in its 126-year history. Laurie served as president and CEO of the Maine Development Foundation. And prior to the Maine Development Foundation, she served 3 governors as Maine's state economist. So with that, Laurie Lachance, I see you are on. If you could, I'm going to lead in a little further. One of the things that you were tasked with was being the co-chair for a service that Governor Mills gave you regarding the economic recovery process for you to co-chair the Economic Recovery Committee. And you recently submitted a report to the governor's office on July 15th, which we have circulated and have posted at least a link to our website for those to review. And I appreciate you sharing it with us. I have reviewed it, at least most of it. I still didn't find the business of attorneys in there, but we'd like to hear how this recovery is going to impact and or how attorneys can help. So with that, Laurie, take the floor.
Well, thank you. What I'd like to do today is just offer kind of an overview of the Economic Recovery Committee and how we went about it, our history, which is a long storied history of about 8 weeks, our membership, how we organized, how we made our recommendations, and then I'll turn quickly to this report and what we actually have put forth, and then would welcome your questions. I will tell you the page number of the report in case you want to follow along or have specific questions on that. I would start by saying that, I've been working in Maine's economy for, I'm approaching 40 years and not quite there yet, but the first 29 years were all spent analyzing and forecasting Maine's economy. And I tell people that this last 8 years of being a college president, I'm really just an economist masquerading as a college president because I'm fairly non-traditional in what you normally see with the credentials and background of a college president. But certainly in running a small private college with a low endowment, we face every single barrier and then some that a private business would face elsewhere in dealing with this pandemic. And I can tell you, I've lived through many recessions and many various downturns, and certainly faced a number of challenges as a college president in the major transformation of higher ed overall. And I have never seen a situation that is as comprehensive and challenging as the one before us right now. And it's truly the combination of the pandemic in and of itself and the economic disruption that the pandemic is wreaking upon us. It's a perfect storm, if you will. So on May 6th, when I had chosen to close our campus on March 15th, there was plenty to do, certainly, in trying to reopen for the fall. But when the governor called and Josh Broder and I had the opportunity to do something, just anything, to help this economy and this state that we love, we both said absolutely yes, as did 45 other individuals, to help try to focus on the recovery process. So the overview of our charge and our mission is on page 23. And really, in a nutshell, the Economic Recovery Committee was tasked with lifting our eyes to the longer term, and by longer, I mean more intermediate term, not the reopening, but that next phase that would bridge the gap between the reopening process and moving us towards the 10-year strategic strategy on economic development that was put forth and announced and sent all over the state around December and January timeframe. So much work with thousands of individuals that partook in that process to get a long-range strategy in place for our economy. Suddenly we're faced with the pandemic, and she asked us to focus on that middle ground. So our charge was truly to focus on the recovery and getting us back on track for the long term. So within that, we immediately broke our work into two segments. The first segment, from the start of May through July 15th, was assessing the current situation and making recommendations that would help to stabilize our businesses and all of our organizations and to support some form of resumption of growth in the economy. And that's the report that's before you now. After this, as I'll explain, we're going to turn our attention to really the true intent of the committee is to focus on how do we sustain and grow. What is the true recovery path and how do we catalyze that? We very quickly formed 6 subcommittee groups, and that's really where the work took place. All of this process has been public. We chose some amazing leaders, which I will show you in a second. And we had these 6 committees on 6 subsections of the economy to try to break it into some logical units. And it's impossible to have a committee of 45 making recommendations. So we started with a much smaller group that allowed, 7 to 10 people to really give their very best thinking, bring people before them, and collect the very best ideas on how we stabilize and support this economy to get us to that reopened and next phase. The membership of this committee is on page 4, and it's a very diverse group that includes 4 members representing the congressional delegation, 4 members representing the Democratic and Republican leads in both the House and the Senate of the Maine Senate, and then a wide array of people from business, from nonprofits, from education, from healthcare, broken into these 6 committees. And the chairs were just excellent. They played an absolutely critical role to getting this amount of work done in such a short period of time. So truly the subcommittees, Josh and I were not a part of any of those subcommittees. We helped them set up the formation of how, and supported them with support staff to get their work done. But each subcommittee was empowered to examine, call in folks to visit with them, experts to share ideas, collect the ideas, synthesize, focus, and prioritize those ideas, and move them up to the total committee. So any subcommittee questions of sort really belongs with those experts that focused on that area. In this 7 to 8 week period, there were over 70 formal meetings of the subcommittees and the committee as a whole. Josh and I with staff probably had well over 100. And what I will take you through today is the result of that work. As we drew closer and realized that a laundry list of, 70 suggestions would not be helpful at all. So with the subcommittees and their leaders, we pared down the committee recommendations. We really encouraged them to go through a process of prioritizing, focusing, and lifting up just the most important, impactful decisions that needed to be made now. And then each of those committees brought those forward. There was a lot of overlap across them. And then we worked as a committee of a whole to do multi-voting and prioritization, not just of the ideas that would go into the report, but of the dollar values we would assign to those. That was done on a consensus basis. So that was our process. And you may know that as of July 1st, we actually sent an extra report to the governor ahead of time to put forward 3 major themes that we felt needed immediate attention and could not wait for July 15th even. The impact of this is changing so rapidly and has become so much more extremely challenging than we could have even imagined even 6 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. And so we tried to be current with the times and get a few things in front of her on July 1st for her to start taking action on. And that included that foundational to everything as far as starting a recovery process was finding a way to safely and as quickly as possible reopen the pre-K-12 system and the child care system, which really isn't a system, but child care across this state so that workers could actually go back to work instead of being home, homeschooling, and trying to work at the same time. All of the committees agreed to that as being a top priority. So we put forth in a July 1st quick start memo to her. Please start to take action on this because the summer is passing quickly and this is critical and foundational to our ability as an economy to actually start any kind of recovery process. A second recommendation was around supporting our businesses who are in dire needs. Now, central to that is certainly our hospitality industry, tourism, retail, with vast needs. And we wanted to get that in front of her to try to start considering a program that would free up some of those CARES Act dollars to more immediately help our businesses who may not make it to mid or late July or mid or late August. And we really wanted to try to give suggestions to stabilize that as quickly as possible. And we quickly realized it's much more than just hospitality, tourism, and retail. There are many other sectors that are struggling for similar reasons. For example, our agricultural sector, fishing, farming, even forestry to a certain point, was greatly impacted when the schools closed down and other organizations and large events and restaurants closed. Suddenly that entire sector had no place to send their product and didn't have the packaging possibilities to put it out on a retail shelf. Wasn't even an option. So there are many, many businesses that are in dire need of help. And we wanted to get her thinking and moving with some focus on helping them as quickly as possible, using the existing entities across the state to do that, rather than starting from scratch and creating something new to try to get the money out. And then the third quick start was around broadband. Heads up that also was a consensus across all 6 committees that for the tele-education piece, the remote and distance learning, for the telework, for the telehealth, for the telemental health, all of those required a much more robust broadband internet access across this state, and getting some kind of head start on that would be helpful. You saw those very same themes reflected and really built upon in the July 15th report, which is we've sent to you. So probably the best summary of that is on page 10. It shows the overview of what we looked at. The committee in all of its meetings very quickly came down to what we identified as 3 major buckets of ideas. One was investments that would support Maine's people, because we recognize you can't have a strong economy if you don't have a workforce that is healthy and engaged and able to connect and get to their work and do their work in an environment that is taken care of. The second set of ideas fell under the theme of stabilizing the employment base by helping all employers, and that includes businesses and nonprofits and all organizations in our state that employ a large number of our people. And then the third bucket was more for infrastructure. And infrastructure would traditionally be thought of as a longer term recovery investment, but we did pull that in now because for 2 reasons. The broadband needs immediate expansion and help, and so we didn't want to wait for a longer period on that. And the connections bond, which was suggested, that includes a transportation element, is something that if we waited till later to put that in, we would miss this legislative cycle, where the legislators could put forward another bond package and begin that process. So we kind of broke with our own rules and put those infrastructure projects into this particular report, which was really supposed to be focused on stabilizing and supporting rather than sustaining and growing. So under the area of supporting Maine people, we have recommended investments that total $497 million. It is no small task, but as you will see with all of these, there's no short money that's going to fix this. There's no quick fix, there's no cheap fix. There are certain things we can do that will certainly be helpful, whether it's changing regulatory hearing schedules or giving permissions for things to be done remotely. There are a number of small things that can help, but these issues are too big and too urgent not to put the appropriate level of funding.
Now,
we recognize as a...
It's Thaddeus here. I wanted to just interrupt a second. So you've given us that broad overview. I wanted to that might be helping law businesses or attorney businesses that relate to what you had just indicated in this $497 million package. And maybe you're getting there, but one of the things that's mentioned in there is public health spending.
Yep.
On PPE gear and things like that. Is the plan to make PPE gear, for instance, available for all businesses, or is this just looking at certain sectors, I guess?
No, the public health and the purchase, particularly of PPE, is to help everybody, every employer. So whether you're a child care provider, a law office, a business, a small residential facility, any kind of employer would have access to less expensive and appropriate PPE and equipment.
Okay.
So in terms of law offices in particular, certainly access to PPE, access to information on how you go about it. Everybody has different size businesses. That is all included for every employer and business entity. The employer grants would also be available. There's nothing here that's meant to be exclusive.
Right. So I was going to ask about the employer grants next. I had reviewed a little bit of that. Are we just at the broad stage right now regarding employer grants, or are there certain criteria that you've already developed as part of a committee?
The committee really went into some great detail and came up with some recommended approaches, balancing the need to, we lean towards getting it out as quickly and in as focused a manner as possible versus having every T crossed and I dotted. So we recommended using existing entities like banks, credit unions, and then the entities like CEI to help get the monies out as quickly as possible and in as productive a way as possible. We did put that forth to DECD for their consideration, but we didn't put it in the report proper because it's really up to them. And they had, we don't have any authority to implement these rules of engagement. We just suggested a path, and the committee had done a lot of work and shared all their best thoughts on that.
Okay. I had a couple other questions too, but I wanted you to go ahead. I know that you've had the broadband in particular. That's really just my understanding, at least, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that the broadband capacity that you're talking about building out in the recommended report, is that just to get like the little capillaries out there across Maine so that Maine households can be in touch when they have nothing in existence to be part of a World Wide Web? Or are we talking about infrastructure build out that helps businesses too?
Yeah, my understanding is, and my co-chair could say this much more articulately than I'm going to, but my understanding is the real need to serve this economy, to make us a modern economy and having a very robust opportunity to fully participate in this global economy that we're operating. It's about a $600 million price tag, which is predominantly infrastructure to do that. This short-term piece is only a fraction of that. At 65 million, you're really talking about doing the right planning, setting up the right structures, and dealing with the immediate problems, just the short-term things, the things that allow us to equitably have an education for our children, to equitably and kindly deal with healthcare in rural areas that simply cannot be delivered in the way it used to be, to take care of those kind of issues in the short run. But it's a much bigger price tag, and my understanding is it's very much about infrastructure to support the type of robust business participation that would be necessary to really fully live into this. So it's the shorter dollars up front to make sure when we implement the bigger dollars, it's done in a very thoughtful way to have the greatest impact.
Thank you, Laurie. I just want to recognize that we only have 5 minutes left. Yep. I wanted to make sure that you were able to share with us those things that you had planned to share with us before.
No, go right ahead. If you want to open up for questions, and I'll share the rest that way.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, please type them into the chat, or if there's a lull, please speak up. One of the things that I'll throw another question out there. I think I might have even alluded to this earlier. I forwarded you a question earlier today, and that is that I believe that a lot of the stimulus money for the unemployed is coming to an end at the end of July. Mm-hmm. Or I should say stimulus money that for a lot of people comes close to tripling what they would get in a unemployment benefit. What is, I guess, the interrelation do you see, or did you look at this in a committee form for those that are encouraged to come back to work, those that can't for some reason go back to work, how are we going to provide support to them during this recovery period when it's still, for some people, not safe out there? How are those two things going to work together for your committee, and how are we going to be able to support employers getting people to work, and how are we going to support those that because of COVID-19 are unable to come back to work?
Well, you raise a great question. And I will say, again, these discussions happened with great strength and debate at the committee level. This balance of providing enough support for the welfare of our people as they are unemployed or underemployed through this period to take care of their basic needs. And that extra $600 has made a huge difference in this stabilizing time period. But I think the committee, the discussion has been that very piece of extra input of $600 every week has acted to prevent some people from even considering going back to work, because it's a terrible trade-off. And so the committee, to my knowledge, hasn't gotten into the intricate details of suggesting exactly how it be implemented. But the recognition of this is we need to, as quickly and as safely as possible, move to the recovery phase, which means those supports need to be adjusted so they don't send the wrong signal to the workforce to stay on the unemployment insurance instead of going back and serve the needs of the businesses of Maine that need to get back to work and get on track. So I don't think that the committee has proposed a specific path for that, but they recognize that some thought by the appropriate agency has to go in to make sure the economic development folks and the labor folks are talking to each other about how you protect people, but at the same time move them as productively and as quickly as possible back into their employer's workplace.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. Are there any questions from the floor? None yet. All right. Well, one of the questions that was posed to me earlier was, you've got a proposal to provide education, essentially the thought that you might have to re-educate people back into a workforce where jobs are permanently lost. Had you come up with, as a committee, any specific recommendations in the report related to, it looked like you were talking about bolstering our current post-education system, like the community colleges, our state universities, with the ability to train and educate. Were there any specific trades or thoughts on what the path forward would be on that?
Yeah, I think in that workforce development $30 million suggested investment, one of the primary pieces was using, again, a known fully developed program to as quickly respond as possible. And that was the Maine Quality Centers, which are housed at the Maine Community College system and have a history, which is, as far as I know, a very positive one, of working with businesses to meet their needs with specific training. So we didn't call out and say, the world needs plumbers right now. It's not like the welding situation, for example, where all kinds of infrastructure was put in place to train welders as quickly as possible to fit business needs. It was more general to say, we have a program that is used to working with employers, has a good success track record, and let's put some money into that as quickly as possible to see if we can get some quick funding out to retrain as quickly as possible and get them back in the workplace. So I'm not sure it went much more detailed. The reason other entities were mentioned is kind of in this knowledge-based, technology-driven economy, there are other sets of skills that may not fit as neatly into that program and that approach for skilled trades or things of that nature. So there are other higher eds like Thomas, for example, that has digital badging, that works with industry certifications. And so we wanted to make sure those weren't excluded from this. And that's why you see kind of broader language.
We want them to be robust too. Laurie, we are running out of time. We actually are already over time, but there was a question that was asked. I don't know if you can see it on the chat group. Also, I wanted to thank you for coming on board and sharing with us everything that you've done, or just a broad view of it. But I'd ask that you don't forget the legal profession, that we can use more legal assistants, paralegals, etc. So do you see the question, Laurie, that came up?
Is this one about how will the money be designated?
Yes.
Yeah, it will go through the channels that are existing. So money going to businesses and employers would be primarily through DECD and labor, working with existing banks, credit unions, and the quasi financial institutions like CEI and the entities that can get the money out as quickly as possible. That's where the application process would go through, primarily through your banker, but for the tinier businesses, through those other entities that work with very small micro businesses and things of that nature. Schools would go through DOE. Whether this is within the governor's part, I don't want to step in this frame. We have no authority to pass out any money. Josh and I are meeting with the Appropriations Committee. I know the legislature is anxious to get involved in that conversation, but that is really between the governor and the legislature and the powers that be. We just offer up those thoughts.
Roger that, Laurie. Thank you very much for coming on Bar Talk. We appreciate your time. And Angela, I know I'm cutting you off here for the rest of our show, but I think we're okay, right, Angela? All right. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on. And if there's any other way that we could funnel you questions, if we have them, could we do that?
Absolutely. Send them along and I'll get them to the appropriate entity.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone.